It happened on a quiet morning, the kind where the world feels almost too still. I was sitting in my own living room, coffee cup warm in my hands, when I saw movement on the porch. At first, I thought maybe it was a delivery or a neighbor passing by. But then I saw her, my daughter-in-law, standing there with a determined look, sliding a key into my front door. The key jammed. She tried again. I froze, heart pounding so loud I thought she might hear it through the walls. That key should not exist. I never gave her one. Yet there she was, jiggling the lock, her face tight with frustration, as if the house she was trying to enter somehow betrayed her. The betrayal wasn't in the metal key scratching at my door. The betrayal was in knowing that family, my own family, had decided my home was theirs to control. I sat there, hidden just beyond the door she thought she owned, watching on the security app as she made her way to the back entrance. My mind raced. My chest burned. How had it come to this? A house I'd bought with my own money, meant as a fresh start after loss, had turned into a battlefield of secrets, a place where trust crumbled into manipulation. And the enemy wasn't some stranger. It was the woman who married my son, the one I once welcomed like a daughter. I remember gripping the arm of the chair so hard my knuckles went white, asking myself questions that made my stomach churn. How did she even get that key? How long had this plan been in motion? Did my son know she was here? Was he part of it too? Nothing prepares you for that kind of betrayal. It doesn't roar in like a storm. It seeps in like poison, drop by drop, until one morning you find yourself staring at the truth on your own doorstep. I thought of all the moments I brushed off, the little warnings I ignored, the way she always had just the right words to sound caring. And suddenly, it all made a horrible kind of sense. That morning, as I sat in silence, I realized my life had shifted. My family wasn't protecting me. They were circling me. And instead of warmth, all I felt was the chill of being hunted in my own home. You might wonder how a story like this begins. How a family can fall apart so quietly that only the cracks are left behind. To answer that, we need to go back 3 months earlier, before the locks, before the cameras, before I ever suspected that love could be twisted into something so dark. After my husband passed away, the house we had built our lives in suddenly felt unbearably empty. The silence was heavy, not peaceful, the kind that echoed with memories. I would sit at the kitchen table in the mornings, 2 cups of coffee prepared out of habit, only to pour his down the sink. That simple act became a reminder that I was truly alone. It was in those fragile weeks that my son and his wife began showing up more often. At first, I was touched. They would drop by with groceries, ask about my day, and sit with me when the nights felt longest. Their presence was a balm against grief, and I told myself how lucky I was to have family who cared enough to check in. But as the weeks went on, I started to notice a shift. Conversations drifted away from how I was coping to what I planned to do with the life insurance money. Their questions were wrapped in concern, gentle suggestions about security, stability, investments. My son would hold my hand, saying how he only wanted me to have something to look forward to, while my daughter-in-law would chime in with bright ideas about real estate or bigger spaces for family gatherings. On the surface, it sounded loving, even wise. But underneath, there was a faint unease I couldn't quite name. Still, I wanted to believe them. I wanted to believe that this was about love, not money. I started imagining what they described: a bigger home, where my grandchildren could play, where Thanksgiving dinners could stretch across a long table, where Christmas mornings could echo with laughter again. I pictured us together, filling rooms with warmth instead of silence. That hope carried me through the days when grief felt suffocating. And then, one afternoon while browsing listings, I saw it, the house that seemed to hold every piece of that dream. A Victorian with a wide porch, tall windows, and enough space to hold the life I thought we could build again. It was expensive, yes, but the insurance would cover it. My heart raced at the thought of giving my family such a gift, of turning sorrow into something beautiful. But another voice whispered, cautious and steady. Something told me not to share this just yet. Perhaps it was intuition, or perhaps it was the way my daughter-in-law's eyes narrowed whenever I mentioned spending money on myself. Whatever the reason, I made a choice. I bought the house quietly, under my own name, determined to finish renovations before revealing it. I thought I was planning the surprise of a lifetime, a gift that would bring us closer. Little did I know, my secret would collide head-on with theirs. The morning I planned to reveal the house felt like Christmas morning. I could hardly sit still, my hands fidgeting with my phone as I imagined their faces. I pictured my son's expression when I told him the place was ours, the way his eyes might soften with gratitude. I imagined my daughter-in-law crying tears of joy, picturing her hosting family dinners and the children running through wide hallways. For weeks, I had nurtured this image, a surprise so grand it would mend every distance between us. The house itself was perfect. I had overseen the last coat of paint, the sparkle of the chandelier, the shine of the kitchen counters. It was ready, not just for living, but for belonging. With a smile tugging at my lips, I called my son, asking if he and his wife could meet me later. I wanted them there, together, so I could hand them this dream. But what he said turned my stomach cold. They were already out looking at houses, and not just any house, the very one I had already purchased. At first, I thought I misheard, but no. He mentioned the address, the Victorian with the porch, as if it were a discovery they had stumbled upon. I sat frozen, the phone heavy in my hand, my excitement unraveling thread by thread. When I arrived at the property, expecting to explain the coincidence, what I saw made my chest tighten. They were already there. My daughter-in-law walked the front yard with a sense of ownership, pointing to the garden beds, gesturing as if redesigning them. She moved through the house with an energy that was not of a hopeful buyer, but of a rightful owner. I watched her speak about the master bedroom as if it belonged to her and my son, while casually suggesting I could take a smaller room down the hall adequate for me. She seemed to think, adequate? In the house I had bought with my own money? The joy I had carried with me collapsed under the weight of their entitlement. I stood in silence, smiling on the outside, but seething inside, realizing I had misjudged everything. What was meant to be a gift had become a stage for manipulation. And as I listened to them speak of our home and our future, I understood that this was not just coincidence. This was strategy. Suspicion took root that day, replacing the dream I had carried. I no longer wondered how to surprise them. I began to wonder just how far they were willing to go. And deep down, I feared the answer was only beginning to reveal itself. It didn't take long for their stories to grow more elaborate. At first, it was casual talk how perfect the house was, how rare an opportunity it would be to live in that neighborhood. But soon, the pressure began. My son called one morning, his voice laced with urgency, telling me another family had already toured the place and was planning to put in a cash offer. If we didn't move fast, he warned, the chance would slip away. The strange part was, I already knew there were no other buyers. The house was mine. Still, I listened, my jaw tight as I nodded along to a lie he thought I believed. That was only the beginning. Days later, my daughter-in-law insisted that the seller wouldn't accept financing, that only a full cash payment would secure the deal. She painted it as though my entire inheritance needed to be placed on the table immediately, or the dream would vanish. I felt the anger rising inside me, like a slow boil. These weren't innocent mistakes or misunderstandings. This was a calculated plan, carefully crafted, designed to push me into draining my life savings. Each new story they spun was another knot in the web of deception. What hurt the most wasn't just the lies themselves, but the realization that my own son was standing beside her, supporting the performance, watching his mother be cornered. But while they plotted, I began to plan in my own quiet way. I took notes, times, dates, details of each excuse and each manipulation. I saved text messages, reread emails, and wrote everything down in a notebook I kept tucked away in my desk drawer. If this was going to turn into a war over my home, I intended to be ready. And yet, beneath the anger, there was disbelief. I kept asking myself how we had arrived at this point. I thought back to his childhood, to the little boy who used to bring me dandelions from the yard. Now here he was, fabricating fake buyers and pretending urgency just to pry open my wallet. How does a heart change like that? Still, grief had taught me resilience. I refused to show my hand. Not yet. Instead, I smiled, pretended to consider their suggestions, and quietly prepared my next move. If they thought I was blind to their schemes, they were mistaken. I was watching, documenting, waiting, because sometimes the best way to catch a lie is to let it run long enough to trap itself. And I had already decided the time was coming when I would turn the tables. The night I decided to act, I felt a calm I hadn't felt in weeks. Their lies had layered so thick I could hardly breathe under the weight of them. And I knew if I didn't take control, I would lose more than just money. I'd lose my peace. So, I called a locksmith. Within hours, every lock on that house had been replaced. New keys, fresh bolts, a clean slate. And before the day was done, I called a security company too. Cameras went up at every entryway, quiet sentinels ready to witness whatever came next. When the work was finished, I sat in the stillness of my home, the glow of the security app open on my phone. It was the first time in months that I felt prepared, like I wasn't walking blindly into their schemes. I didn't have to wait long to see if my instincts were right. The very next morning, there she was, my daughter-in-law standing on my porch, slipping that mysterious key into the lock. I held my breath, watching on the screen as she twisted and pushed, her face growing tighter with every failed attempt. She tried again and again, confusion giving way to frustration. Then, just as I suspected, she moved around to the back door. Same routine, same failure. I can't describe the mixture of emotions that flooded me. Suspense, yes, but also an almost bitter satisfaction. Proof, hard, undeniable proof that she had a key she was never meant to have, and that she intended to use it without my knowledge. Outrage simmered in my chest, but it was laced with a strange relief. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't paranoid. I had caught her. Later that morning, my phone rang. It was my son. He told me, in his careful voice, that his wife had noticed something strange. The locks seemed to be changed. She was worried someone else might be tampering with the house. I listened, silent, letting him spin the story. And then, steady as stone, I told him what I knew, that I had cameras, that I had seen her with my own eyes trying to open doors she had no right to touch. There was a pause on the other end, a long, weighted silence where I imagined him staring at the floor, realizing the mask had slipped. And in that silence, I felt the shift. For the first time in this battle, I wasn't the one on defense. I wasn't the victim anymore. I was the one holding the evidence, the truth, and the power. I ended that call knowing the war wasn't over, but the ground beneath us had changed. They would push harder. I knew that. But I was ready now, braced for the next move. And I didn't have to wait long, because the very next card they played was the most manipulative one of all. When the phone rang that morning, I wasn't expecting anything out of the ordinary. But the moment I heard my son's voice, I knew he was carrying something heavy. He hesitated, then told me the news his wife was pregnant. For a moment, my heart softened. The thought of a new life, of another grandchild to hold, brought a wave of warmth I hadn't felt in so long. I wanted to smile, to celebrate, to feel nothing but joy. But the way he framed it told me this wasn't just an announcement. It was a strategy. He spoke of how much space they would need, how stressful the pregnancy already was, how his wife couldn't handle tension. The house, he insisted, would be the perfect solution. Not just for them, but for me too. Each word was carefully placed, like stepping stones designed to lead me back to the same conclusion: hand over the money, secure the house, sacrifice for the family. That warmth I had felt was quickly tangled with guilt. I pictured the baby, growing inside a woman who had already lied, schemed, and tried to force her way into my home. I thought of my son, the little boy who once clung to my hand, now speaking like a man I barely recognized. And there I was, caught between the joy of a grandchild and the sting of manipulation. I asked myself, when did love become a bargaining chip? When did families start using unborn children as leverage? The thought sickened me, and yet a part of me still wavered, because no matter how much betrayal I felt, the idea of refusing help when a child was involved gnawed at my heart. But then I remembered the key, the cameras, the lies about cash offers, the endless pressure to drain my savings. If I gave in now, there would be no end. Today, it was the house. Tomorrow, it would be something else. I realized I had to protect more than my money. I had to protect my boundaries, my dignity, and ultimately the example I was setting for that very child they claimed to be protecting. That afternoon, I called a lawyer. I laid everything out: the fraudulent stories, the stolen access, the manipulation. He listened carefully and assured me I had every right to document it all. It was the first time I felt the law, not just my instincts, standing on my side. I hung up, knowing one thing with absolute clarity: I could love my grandchild without sacrificing myself to deception. And for the first time, I felt ready to draw that line firmly in the sand. Months have passed since I changed those locks and drew the line that should have been drawn long before. My life looks different now, not because of what I lost, but because of what I chose to protect. The mansion that was once the center of their schemes is now truly my home. I filled it with pieces that reflect me, not their dreams, not their demands, just mine. Flowers bloom in the garden I tended with my own hands. The dining room table hosts neighbors who bring warmth and laughter, and the silence that used to weigh me down has turned into peace. My son did eventually come back, not with more lies, but with the heaviness of remorse. At first, our conversations were short and stilted, full of pauses where the truth sat between us like an uninvited guest. But over time, he began to show me the man I raised, the one who could admit mistakes, who wanted to repair, who understood that his silence and compliance had cut as deep as his wife's manipulation. He calls me now on Sundays, just to talk. It isn't perfect, but it's honest, and that's worth more than any false promise. As for my daughter-in-law, her mask eventually cracked wider than she expected. Through my lawyer, I learned that what she tried to do to me wasn't her first time. She had a history convincing her own grandmother to sign over property under the guise of helping the family. That woman spent her last years in a nursing facility, stripped of the security she should have had. When I heard that, I felt both horror and clarity. This wasn't just a desperate mistake. This was a pattern, one she had practiced before and intended to perfect with me. I won't pretend it doesn't still hurt. Betrayal from strangers is easier to swallow. Betrayal from those you let into your home, your life, your heart that lingers. But I've learned something in this season of rebuilding. Boundaries are not walls that keep love out. They are doors that protect love from being twisted into chains. Without boundaries, love becomes obligation, and generosity turns into exploitation. I still see my granddaughter, a bright little soul who deserves none of the shadows cast by the adults around her. I hold her, I sing to her, and I promise myself she will grow up knowing that love does not require surrendering your dignity. She will learn that family can be both gift and challenge, and that respect is the thread that keeps it from unraveling. To anyone listening who has faced something similar, whether it's family who pressured you, friends who took advantage, or loved ones who blurred the line between care and control, know this: you are not wrong for drawing a line. Protecting yourself does not make you unkind. It makes you strong. It makes you whole. I survived my family's betrayal. But more than that, I learned how to thrive again. And if my story can give even one person the courage to step out of guilt and into strength, then telling it is worth it. Thank you for staying with me through this journey. If you've ever faced manipulation or betrayal in your own life, I'd love to hear your story in the comments. Share it, you never know who might need to hear it. And if you found something in my story that spoke to you, please remember to like, subscribe, and join me here again. Because sometimes, the most powerful thing we can do is speak the truth and remind each other we're not alone.